All right, nerds, nerdettes. It's been a long little hiatus. It's been about 3 months since I last posted a video back in January. And yeah, so timing is everything, right? So I got sick, and then I had to do a good amount of traveling for work, and then, well, pretty much now we're here. So time goes by when you're not looking, I guess. We're picking back up on the HKM B-17G, and we've got two major modifications that have to be done. First is the waist gun positions. So on the B-17G, during production, they made a mid-series, because the G part is the series of the aircraft. They made a mid-series modification to the G model, and well, I guess there's maybe more than one, but anyway. So the things that set the G apart from the F would be the chin turret. We've talked about that. I believe it's also got slightly more powerful engines. The G model is like the ultimate B-17 that was ever put into service. Talk about that a little bit more in a bit. But so the big modifications here are the waist gun positions, specifically the right-hand waist gun. So for all of the preceding B-17s that had waist guns, which is pretty much all of them, all of the ones that were used in combat at least. One of the big issues is the gunners would, as they strafe around inside the fuselage to get their guns turned, that is not a very straight edge, is it? But as the gunners would strafe around inside the fuselage, they would bump into each other, which isn't ideal, right? Because now you're impeding each other. You're going to lose track of your target if you're both tracking an aircraft from different sides. And the entire focus around a B-17's flying formation is making sure as many guns are on any target coming into the formation as possible. So if all of the pilots are running into each other, bumping into each other as they strafe around inside the fuselage, trying to get guns on target, it's less time that they're actually spending on target, which is not good. So we kind of got smart, or I guess Boeing kind of got smart for the B-17G later aircraft, and they moved the right-hand side waist gun position forward by a couple of feet. And that allows the two waist gunners to clear each other as they make a full arc within the fuselage. Now, Texas Raiders is a very late model G aircraft. She was finished, completed in July 12th, 1945. So as far as the B-17s go, she's a pretty late aircraft, right? We're well into the production of the B-29 at this point. B-17s are being phased out. The war in Europe is pretty much over. And Japan's really all that's left. And at that point, we're really focused on the B-29 as the frontline bomber for most of the bombing campaign that was done on the Pacific side. So the B-29 is really the driving force here. The B-17s are being phased out. Very late model aircraft. Anyway, so the HKM kit is an early G. The only kit I know of, and I'm happy to be corrected on this, if anybody else is aware, please throw a comment down and correct me. The only kit I know of that does a late model G fuselage is Airfix's 1/72nd, I believe. The Revell kit, as I said, I built 909 previously, which is also a G model. It has the equally distanced waist gun positions. The HKM kit is specifically on the box. It says it's an early production. So it has the equal position. And as you see here, I'm fixing that. So I knew going in that building Texas Raiders being a late model G, I was going to have to make this modification. So I had been dreading it for a while. I've been procrastinating it for a while. Ultimately, it wasn't that hard. But anyway, we're there. I will point out, for anybody building this kit, the opening where my finger was right there for a second, the regular opening for the waist gun positions isn't actually fully cut out and large enough for the glass that goes in. And yes, although you don't usually see it, The B-17s do have glass that goes over the waist gun positions. It can be pulled, it's not pulled, but essentially retracted into the fuselage and slid aft. Again, these aircraft are designed to fly at 30,000 feet. It's very cold up there, and if your airplane's moving 250 miles an hour through air that's already very cold, well, this is why bomber jackets are a thing, right? Super insulated, leather, windproof, wind resistant. Yeah, so if you don't have to have the waist gun ports open, it's ideal not to have the waist gun ports open. So if you're flying over friendly territory, you're back stateside, close the windows. But anyway, so the openings in the fuselage as molded are not quite large enough to accept that glass. And the instructions are very clear, as you'll see in the top left, that you need to cut out a little bit of material. For anyone that's kind of new to this and just getting started, I will say this, like a hobby knife, is not going to cut it. You're going to need some kind of saw, or you're going to need one of the panel line scribers and just keep scribing along the line there until you break through. A knife's really not going to cut it. I would actually say it's probably pretty dangerous to use a knife if you're not careful, because if you're putting a lot of pressure on trying to get through that little piece of plastic, you could very easily, shiv yourself in the process. So that's my word of caution. Be very careful when you're putting the waist gun positions in. Before we get to the next major modification needed for Texas Raiders serial B-17G, I'm going to finish out the fuselage with some of the structural components, but also give some cautionary advice to anybody building this kit. So this is the tail wheel fuselage mount. So that pinhole right there is where the tail landing gear strut mounts into the airframe. This part, as well as many of the other parts in the kit, suffer from what I would say is, well, I'm not going to say an overabuse, but there's quite a few injector pin marks left over on the kit. I'm not an expert in injection molding process. I know it is a lot harder than many people realize, honestly. But a lot of the parts do have injector molds or injector pins left over. Be aware of it. They do a relatively good job at hiding them. For example, most of the ones you can see here on the underside are concealed by the fuselage structure, right? So only the tail landing gear strut mount is actually visible under the aircraft. The rest of it is concealed. But it is still something to be aware of. It is something to be careful of and make sure that you're not leaving them visible, because there are quite a few that are visible if you're not careful. So just a word of caution here. Ammo boxes on this aircraft, I was kind of torn. That is the wrong position to be putting that. Don't worry, I'll fix it in a second. But I was a little torn. I didn't particularly want to display it with a lot of ammunition running around. It's kind of a commemoration of a commemoration situation. So Texas Raiders, as I said, was built in July of 1945. Texas Raiders actually went to the U.S. Navy first as a PB-1Y patrol bomber. And so, while she was in a somewhat combat role with the Navy, we're not talking like 909 was or Memphis Belle was, running consistent daylight bombing events over in Europe. And I get the Texas Raiders herself as a commemorative aircraft to those air crews and to, the B-17 bomber fleet and the men that flew them. I don't know. It's a weird place. So I didn't really want to go ahead and run ammunition belts through the aircraft like I will be doing with Memphis Belle. And it's just kind of a stylistic thing for me. But having the boxes in place, the actual aircraft as a commemoration to those crews had the ammo boxes in place, did run some ammunition belts around. I was kind of torn on it, but I kind of did the halfway solution for myself, and I like the way it's coming out, so that's what I'm kind of sticking with. Anyway, so this piece as well I had trouble with, being the walkway from the ball turret aft over to where the APU is. Top tip, didn't know that B-17s had an APU. They do. Drops out 28 volts of DC, powers all the aircraft electrics and allows them to start the engines electrically. So that was pretty neat. It's a little single-cylinder two-stroke engine. It's made by they were made by companies that now make chainsaw engines, so it's pretty funny. But continuing on. So yeah, that piece I had trouble getting it to fit. It was slightly too long, so it had a little bit of a bow in it. It mounts by kind of mounting up to what look like injector pin marks, but they're not injector pin marks on the forward face of the aft tail landing gear strut bulkhead. And those injector or not injector pin marks, those cylindrical bosses that stick out of that bulkhead actually slot into recesses in the floor. And I corrected it being too long by just sanding that end of the floor a little bit. It didn't cause any fit issues, still made it up just fine, and it got rid of the bow. So again, be aware, it was an issue that I did have. Here we got the first gun going in. The guns, I painted them in rubber black instead of just flat black. It makes them a little bit more visually appealing, a little bit more interesting, and I think it works. You know, the flat black guns, while yeah, most of the guns were painted flat black, by the time they're stained and scratched and have been used and manipulated, they do start to pick up, you know, oils off people's hands. They start to pick up dirt and grime, and yeah, their colors are a little bit more varied. So anyway, moving forward, for the glass on the aircraft, the fuselage, I did something a little, I don't know if it's correct. It's probably not correct, but I like it. It makes the model a bit more visually appealing. And what I did was I painted the window frame, you know, quote unquote window frame, and in the fuselage side as well with one of the Tamiya colors that's more representative of a zinc chromate primer. And I think it just breaks up the monotony of the what will be the green final color on the aircraft. And to me, it makes sense because the aircraft are probably going to getting their windows put in, getting their glass put in on the factory line before they go to paint. So there's a pretty good chance that the primer is exposed and you can see it. The instructions said to do a lot of these windows with just bare aluminum frames. Again, I just thought it looked a little bit more visually interesting to have like a zinc chromated frame around the window, so that's what I did. We'll see how it works out on the final model because, you know, I haven't seen it yet, so everybody can tell me what they think when we get to that phase and drop me a comment. Let me know. So I did it on the fuselage side and on the window side. Attaching the windows, I used some microcrystal clear. This, last time I tried to use it on the MiG-29's bubble canopy, it didn't go particularly well. It did eventually work, but it took me a couple of tries to get it right. So I wasn't super impressed with it at that time, but I figured I would, you know, it's probably user error. Once it's a fluke, twice is an epidemic, so let's go ahead and try it again here. And so far it's been holding out just fine on the B-17. The fit's probably honestly better on the HKM B-17 than the monogram MiG-29 was, so it's worth a shot. Here we are coming into the last big modification, and that's the tail gun. So the original B-17s just have an extended tail cone that has a canvas opening in the back, and that's where the guns stick through. The later B-17s have the Cheyenne tail, which is named for the United Airlines Modification Center, which is in Cheyenne, Wyoming. So to prevent impact from the production lines, the Cheyenne tails were added at the modification center rather than on the factory floor, just to, you know, prevent slowdowns, basically. The aircraft were delivered to the modification center and then delivered out to the fleet. The gun has quite a few advantages, or the turret has quite a few advantages. It changes the mounting position of the guns relative to the gunner, which makes it more convenient for them to control. It gives a much wider field of fire, and it does shorten the tail of the aircraft quite significantly. So very, very effective modification for the aircraft. Unfortunately, again, here we go, the HKM B-17 kit is an early version of the aircraft, so it does not come with the Cheyenne tail. I will put the link in the description of the video of where I purchased this set, because this is just an aftermarket Cheyenne tail set. It's from well, it's basically from eBay, but it's from Resin to Detail shop. Overall, it's pretty good. I do like that they give you gun barrels to essentially replace all of the gun barrels in the kit with ones that are, I would say they're better. They're slightly better. It's not a huge difference, but it does make a difference. And yeah, so really the big thing about it is it's a resin 3D printed aftermarket piece. So there are some witness marks from where the supports were on the bottom of the tail cone. Just be aware of that. You're going to have to sand it, and again, it's resin, so you really want to be careful when you're sanding it. You want to be wearing a mask or a respirator, and wet sanding is preferable. Do it somewhere that's well ventilated, and all your regular environmental concerns for your own health. And anyway, it's a pain in the butt to paint the interior of, but it is possible. Some of the parts are very difficult to get to fit together, but they do work once they fit, specifically the gun sight. It has a support bar that has to sit over the top of it, and it has to sit on top of the tail cone piece as well. And then you'll catch it as I kind of rotate and manipulate it around. There's a beam that comes down from the gun sight and goes basically all the way to the floor, and it's got like branches that stick out. That all has to go in from the top in order to get it to fit correctly. So it's very finicky. You got to be very careful. Remember, it's resin. Resin's more brittle than it is flexible, so you want to make sure you don't snap it. It just takes some careful manipulation to get it into the correct spot. But it does fit ultimately, and it does look good once it's in place. I didn't even glue it, actually, because it just sits pretty tight and pretty snug, so no need from my end, so I just left it. The interior is detailed. There's a walkway. There are ribs for the shape of the fuselage to reinforce it, and it does have pass-through and lightning holes, which is pretty cool. It comes with the ammo boxes. It comes with the gunner's seat. It does not come with the base of the gun, like the mechanism part of the gun. It only comes with the barrels. So you're using the mechanism body of the gun from the kit and putting it in with the aftermarket barrels. And they just sit on that beam that comes down from the gun sight. So all in all, once put together, it does look quite good. I did enjoy it, and pretty happy with it. It looks to fit up to the fuselage pretty well. You guys can be the judge once it's on there. I will say the glass that comes with it, or quote-unquote glass, it's just molded clear plastic. It's interesting to work with, specifically because they leave quite a bit of excess material on the bottom. The detail is not super well defined, like it's not immediately visible. It may just be that my lighting and my bench is not conducive to that. I am trying to be careful, but getting it trimmed to the correct size and shape has been tricky. I think I'm pretty close to where it is now. Like I'm at the point where I'm just going to file and sand it to continue. But it's been tricky to get the right shape. They do give you the kind of the mold, quote unquote, 3D printed part. So if I do really screw it up, I could always essentially heat form a replacement part myself. I've never done that before. I kind of want to try, kind of don't. So I don't think I'll be pursuing that if I can avoid it. But they do give you those pieces, I guess, just in case you mess. I will add another word of caution here as well. So the seat right here that goes into the Cheyenne tail for the resin to detail kit, it's only really supported on the aft side where it meets into one of the formers. It's not very well supported at the forward end, so it constantly wants to fall forward when you're mounting it. They don't give you any instructions, so I think it should sit pretty level. From the pictures I've seen from the inside of a Cheyenne turret, it should sit pretty level. So you're really just gluing it on the aft end. It took me a while to get it happily, just to sit happily. It was very frustrating. Looking at the build record and the history of the Cheyenne turret, it's kind of fascinating because they did 1,550 airplanes with this modification, that's just wild. I can't imagine flying 1,500 aircraft through the production run to a modification center and then doing that modification there rather than doing it on the factory floor. At Lockheed, at Douglas, at Boeing. It's just Man, that's a lot. It really hammers in the wartime industrial effort. Anyway, we're pretty much coming to an end, so we kind of, just a 5-second recap, we've gone through basically the major modifications needed to make Texas Raiders out of the early G model kit. Covered the waist gun, covered the Cheyenne gun. Next episode is going to be a pretty special one. It may run a little long, but deal with it, frankly. The last one on the Memphis Belle, you saw the motors running on the electrical system. Just in one wing. Obviously, I have to leapfrog this with the HKMs, so let's just say the HKM's a little bit more developed. All right, if you stuck around this long, thank you so much. I love every single one of you, and I appreciate you sticking with my rambling here as I try to get back into the swing of things. The next episode is gonna be a wild one. We're gonna make a big leapfrog jump from the Memphis Belle's progress, and so it'll be fun to watch. There's some catching up, but then we'll get to the fun part. Feel free to leave me a like, a comment, subscribe, tell me a story, give me some advice, tell me which other B-17 kits have the offset waist guns. Happy to hear from any of you. Otherwise, take care of yourselves. Have a great day.